Steve Lenshow, Great Plains Manufacturing. Now we're going to talk about setting up our swath command, and one of the important things that has to be done there is the measurements from the GPS antenna to where we actually drop seed. So we're going to do this in two parts. First part of it is the tractor itself. Tractor itself is set up in the main terminal. As you can see, we can select the tractor and we can name it, and we've got our T8.390. And then once we have the tractor set in there, some of the important dimensions that are really in there, we must have our D dimension, which is 50 inches. That's our receiver to our axle. And then EB dimension is our axle to our 2-point pins on the planter itself, not to the drawbar, but to the 2-point pins. C dimension is actually, should be 0 at all times if the antenna is sitting right in the middle of the roof, and that's where it should be. Otherwise, you'd have a negative to the left and a positive to the right. E dimension is the height of the receiver down to the ground, and of course the F dimension is basically the axle to the ground itself. This is very, very important, must be measured very accurately, and those inputs are put in there, and you put in and add in, and that can be to the nearest ½ an inch or however accurate you want to make that to input all those dimensions that are in there. Now we're going to show you how to measure the tractor and how to accurately put those dimensions and configure that. The secret to accurate swath command settings is to really come up with accurate measurements from the GPS receiver back to the 2-point hitch on the tractor itself. We start with the height of the receiver itself, and you might have settings already in there from the steering tractor, but I recommend you start and you measure those over again. We have a flat bar here at the bottom. We have 135 inches to the bottom of the receiver itself. Receiver to the ground. Next important setting is receiver to axle. I've located the axle. Here's my mark here. I want to get a very accurate dimension from the center of the antenna to the axle. We're at 48 inches. That's not a swag estimate, and that has to be very, very accurate. Once we've done that, the other dimension that's going to be already into your template there is basically from the ground to the axle itself. We have 38 inches. The last dimension we're looking for is the most important one, and that's the other part of the equation. And that's from the axle back to the 2-point pins on the tractor. That's in the field position. We want the 2-point down in that position. We want to accurately measure back to those 2-point pins. From the axle, we have 57 inches. Once we have that, we have all the dimensions that are necessary on the tractor side. After we inputted all of our geometry dimensions for the tractor, the vehicle itself, and everything's accurately been measured, the other half of the equation is the planter itself. We've created a planter here, which is our implement there that's already created, and the name of the implement's already been inputted in. That's the type of planter that we have. It's a drawn type implement. We hit the right arrow key again, and then we actually have the section control set up, and the implement tractor itself, the implement function is set up as a planter. And now we actually see the geometry of the planter itself and the setback dimension there. As you can see here, the 480 inches. If you try to input that factor, that's already coming from our section control, and that's already dictated by the planter itself. Likewise, we're talking about from the 2-point pins back to where we drop seed. We cannot change that dimension either, because that's also implemented from what's already been put in and installed at the factory itself as far as the dimension set back there. Where that comes from is if we go back to the main terminal itself, we go to control setup, and as you can see, we have a physical layout button. And that physical layout button, and we're looking for the dimension back on that particular planter that we have, and that dimension should be added as a negative that's coming back here. And as we see, channel 1 is entered as a negative 263, and that's the number that's put in there. That dimension is from the 2-point pins on the planter back to where we drop seed. That's also right in front of the rear row 7 inches, and in back of the front row 7 inches. or where the stagger that we have in there, that's where that center line is, to where we actually drop seed. We can hit the physical check button there, and as you can see, that puts the planter back behind us. And that also syncs up with the swath command to make sure that everything's talking to each other and everything's synced up correctly. Once we hit our physical layout button again, that's where we come back up, hit our main screen. As you can see, as everything blinked red and then turned white, when it's ready, it's syncing everything back up. And that's what's created that number right there. That number cannot be changed, and that's where that arrives at. Next, we're going to talk about the section control itself. All the sections are set up depending upon that's at the factory itself. We got 12 sections on this planter, and these are the dimensions that we have for each one of the sections itself. Once that's there, we also have a timing factor there, and we'll talk about that just a little bit later on once we get in there. We can also turn on virtual switches, which we have 12 virtual switches for each one of those, and that's always going to be displayed on the front screen as these that are displayed right here. As you can see, they're in yellow right now. Once I turn my master on, that I actually have GPS for section control, you can see my rows come up, and those are individual virtual switches to shut off rows as you choose to do that. If you wish to do that manually, you got 12 sections to shut off those correctly. Those are also mapped to our 3 switches across the bottom, and it'll shut those sections off also if you want to do that by section, which is split into 16 rows each on this planter here, usually in thirds. So your 3 switches that'll shut off. For more on section control on Great Plains planters, go to greatplainsag.com. Thank you.